So in this third screencast, we are going to go over a few more definitions involving color, and then we're going to talk about some systems that classify color and then some psychology of color. Now, when we start here, one of the definitions or things that you'll hear when you talk about color a lot is hue. And so what hue really is it references a color it represents a color without reference to how dull or saturated or dark or light it is, right? So it's kind of the purity of the color, and it corresponds to wavelength. So when we think about our wave, right, hue is going to correspond to wavelength. It represents color. To how dull or saturated or dark or light or anything like that. Now, and it corresponds to the wavelength. Now, value is also known as brightness, right? And it's the term that's used by artists to describe how light or dark a color appears. Right? And it corresponds to the amplitude of the wave. Right? And the amplitude is just kind of how tall the wave is here. Okay? So if it's very bright, it's very tall. If it's dull, it's very small. Now, chroma is a third term that artists will refer to. It's also known as saturation. Okay? And it's basically how pure or saturated a color is. A color becomes less saturated or duller as more of its complement is added. So for example, I was painting yesterday with kind of a mint green, and that was very bright. And I wanted to make it a little duller, to make it more of kind of that rustic kind of turquoisey green, and so I added a little bit of red, right? And it desaturated it. If this is kind of hard for you to visualize, I have two visualizations here. This is the blue hue, so a blue hue, which is, one wavelength at various levels of value, okay? And so we can see here, right, we're really dark and we're really light here. We can mess around with value by adding a lot of times black and white paint, which we will do in lab. Then when we talk about various levels of saturation, we again are starting with that blue color here, and we are mixing in the complement until it gets duller, till it forms kind of a gray like you see here. So those are some terms that artists refer to that relate back to kind of the chemistry of wavelengths. Now, throughout history, philosophers, scientists, and artists have really tried to understand color by organizing it. Sorry if it broke up there. I had to pause the screencast for just a moment. All right, so we're talking about organizing color. And so one of the things that we see is many artists have used and scientists have used color wheels. Now, the most familiar color wheels are based on the very first color wheel that was created by Isaac Newton in 1672. And it looks like this, right, where the colors were listed here. And basically what he did is he took the spectrum and took the two ends here and made a wheel, okay? Now, the colors on that wheel that are the opposite of each other are the complementary colors, and when mixed together, they're going to neutralize each other, cancel out. But what colors make it onto a wheel and what colors they oppose have changed over time and continue to be a point of discussion even today. The color wheel continues to evolve, and we see a variety of models that can be asymmetric, three-dimensional, or both. And so I'm going to talk to you about a few of these. This was another model that came out in 1810, right? And this is, nope, I'm ahead of myself here. Sorry. This is a model that came out in 1708. I thought that was real. I was like, I felt like that was closer when I put these together. In 1708, it was by painter Claude Boutet. I'm sure I'm pronouncing that incorrectly. He was French. And you can see it looks a little different. There's some different amounts of colors that are on it, right? And we're kind of have some other colors that are opposite. So you can see how those have changed. Then in 1810, on this slide, painter Philip Otto wrong, right, in 1810, really took a giant leap in the history of color theory by turning the wheel into a three-dimensional sphere. And when we turned it into this three-dimensional sphere, there were two poles, and one pole was white and one pole was black, right? And so he did that. Entomologist and engraver Moses Harris created another color wheel. So here was another iteration in 1770. And he believed there were three primary colors, right? Red, blue, and yellow here, which mixed to make black. And he organized his wheel based on that. Okay. And then another example of a wheel was made by chemist Michael Eugene Chevreul, which again, sure I'm mispronouncing. And he became interested in color when he worked as the director of dyeing at a tapestry plant. And basically, the weavers were complaining that black yarns looked different when placed next to blues. And so his work on the subject and the color wheel that he created in 1861 had a really big influence over artists at the time. But again, very similar to Albert's, he was interested in colors that were next to each other. Okay. Now, other systems for classifying colors. All right, we talked about kind of a color wheel, but now we're going to get into a more systematic classification of colors. And the first system that I really want to talk to you about is Werner's nomenclature of color. I have found two different references for this. One says 1821 and one says 1814. I'm not going to ask you the exact years of any of these, so please don't memorize them, but I did want to pull that up, that I found two different things. And Werner's nomenclature of color, if I can remember it, I'm going to bring it to class. It's a book that it was really the first time where there are colors, the colors are numbered, there's a name for the color, and it was used for biologists, so that when they went into the field and they discovered a new animal or a new a plant, they could match the color to that and describe it accurately. And so, for example, right, if I discovered this avocado, right, and I said, okay, it's avocado green, right, I wouldn't know if we were talking about the outside of the avocado, which is really that blackish green there, or this part of the avocado here, which is really more of a bright green, closer to that emerald green, or the yellow green here in the interior. So as a scientist, if I went out and discovered something new and I said that's avocado green, that could mean three different things. And so this was a problem for scientists at the time. And so Abraham Werner created this book of color samples. It was used by lots of biologists, including Charles Darwin, to help identify colors of new species. Now, there are three other color systems that we are going to talk about, but there are many. One is the Munsell color system, CIE, and PMS. When we talk about the Munsell color system, it was developed in the early 20th century by Albert Munsell. And he was a scientist and an artist, and again, we're trying to quantify color. And he tried to break color out based on hue, value, and chroma. Okay? And so by breaking the color into these three subcategories, what he found were certain colors had more dimension when it came to value or chroma, making a three-dimensional and non-symmetric model, which Munsell called a color tree, right? So some of these had a lot more dimension. They went farther. A really good example is I feel like reds and purples have a really wide variety of colors, but there's not a lot of depth to yellow. You can't get a lot of kind of changes in saturation in yellow, okay? So the Munsell color tree is organized around an axis right here that goes from white to black. White to black. There is the axis. And the horizontal color wheels flank the axis, and they represent hue. And so we have the horizontal color wheels here. And each wheel radiates from the dullest, so this would be the dullest, to the most saturated. When we look, for example, at green, you can pull out cards, and this would be what a card would look like that was pulled out from green. Now, the first industry to adopt this was the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and they used it to identify soil types. I wanted to buy this to be able to bring it to class to show you, because I thought, oh, a three-dimensional model of color, how cool. Amazon does not sell it, but they do sell some of these cards, and I very quickly got priced out of how expensive those were. So I'm going to continue to look, but I find that to be really interesting. Another model of classifying color is the CIE color space. The CIE is named, it's named after the International Commission on Illumination. It's French, so it's a little different. That's where the CIE comes from. It's based on the French name. It is the most sophisticated color wheel to date and the most precise model of human color vision that we have. It was a pretty exciting breakthrough because it made it possible to pinpoint the exact color with a mathematical formula. Now, prior to its invention, color matching was done by trial and error, which is time consuming and a pretty imperfect process. So with this, suddenly textile companies, printers, car makers, and thousands of other industries that require color matching could do it really simply and easily. So when we look at this, basically the diagram shows a range of human vision colors. And so I have two diagrams here. This one is broken up into, you can see the wavelengths here, but I like this one because it showed kind of like the classifications of green, yellowish green, but you can see more of the gradient here. Okay, so it's broken up, but this is generally what we use. All the colors on the outer ring of the curve represent the pure wavelengths of light from the visible spectrum. The colors on the flat line, right, represent colors mixed from red and violet. That's your purples, okay, which are not part of the visible spectrum because red and violet are at opposite ends of the spectrum and don't ever meet or mix. Non-spectral colors are inside the space but are limited to colors that are a mix of only two spectral colors. So we're only mixing two spectral colors here. And basically, if you draw a line between any 2 points on the curve, the colors along that line will be a mix of two colors. Okay, so if we draw a line between any point, any 2 points, it's a mix of these colors. Okay, so if you draw a line between like red here and cyan here, you're going to find white in between them because these are complementary colors when they cancel. Okay, so if we were to go from over here, which is green, to yellow, there's not any white because those aren't complementary colors. So instead you see a really nice gradient. This two-dimensional representation of human color vision, though, is limited because it misses entirely non-spectral colors made up of 3 or more wavelengths of light. So we're just mixing 2 things here instead of 3 things, which are kind of interesting, or 4 things. Now, so we have another classification, which is abbreviated PMS, which is an unfortunate abbreviation, but it's the Pantone matching system. The Pantone matching system hits the news every year because they choose a color of the year. And so I don't remember what this year's color is. Sometimes they choose 2 colors. I know the year after COVID, 2021, they chose yellow and gray, which they said we kind of all needed more happiness, which was yellow, and the previous year had been sort of gray. And so I thought that was kind of nice. But they choose different colors based on the year. This was developed by Lawrence Herbert. In 1963, in order to standardize the colors for printing, each color in the system is the same no matter where the color's produced, and there are no PMS colors that can't be produced by the... sorry, let me back up. There are colors here that cannot be produced by the CMYK printing process, okay? So this contains colors that cannot be produced by the CMYK printing process. Okay. And the reason is theoretically cyan, magenta, and yellow can create all the colors that we can see, but in reality they don't because there's some limitations to the ink. So unlike the 4 colors of the CMYK, this system uses 14 colors, right? So it has 14 base colors, and because we have a larger number of base colors, there are more numerous colors that the Pantone system can produce that the CMYK system cannot. So we've learned a lot about colors. We've also learned about how to classify colors, and now we're going to talk a little bit about the psychology of colors. So one of the things you'll hear referred to a lot of times are warm and cool colors. And generally there's a debate about where they start and end, but what we consider our warm colors are red, orange, yellow, yellow, green, and browns. Those are generally considered warm colors. And violet, blue, blue grays, and stark grays are generally considered to be cool colors. Now, these categories of warm and cool colors, as they're referred to in art and design, are not scientifically based. They're actually the opposite of scientific color temperature scales, where red is at the cool end and blue is at the hot end. So the blue part of the flame is the hottest because that's at the hot end of the scale. The colors we associate with warm and cool come from our emotional associations with a natural phenomena. So if we look here, right, snow and blue here is cool to the touch, and a fire is warm. And so that's where this idea of warm and cool colors come from. Now, we've talked about him before, but artist and color theorist Joseph Albers, right, really challenged the notion that blues are always cool and reds are always warm. In some of his matching here, what he's trying to show is cool pink, right? That's a cooler color, and red alongside blues. So he's saying, okay, hey, look, these are cooler. And then he's saying, okay, look, blues can be warmer as well, alongside some pinks and reds. So it's one of the things that Joseph Albers investigated. Now, here is another, when we talk about psychology of color, can color affect your mood? And the answer is yes and no. There's very little research on how the brain actually responds to color. Now, we do know we respond to color in 3 different ways. The first is our biological response. We do know how we respond biologically to red objects. They can inspire fear and sexual desire and those types of things. We also know some things about how we respond biologically to blue light. It can help everything from seasonal affective disorder to issues with our internal clocks to problems with concentration. So there have been some studies on that. Now, the second kind of response is our cultural response. For example, in the West, blue is far and away the favorite color and yellow is the least favorite color. Where if you go to the East, what happens is yellow climbs really to the top of the charts as a favorite color. And those differences have to do with cultural associations with the various colors. The third kind of way that we respond to color is our personal associations with color. So Baker Miller pink was created by the psychologist Alexander Schoss. And it's this pink color here. It was used to paint some jail cells in the late 1970s. And so if you were to go to prison and have to live in a pink cell, then pink may be a real turnoff for you. But if you grew up in a pink room with a loving and supportive household, then you may gravitate towards pink, right? And that's our personal association. Now, Alexander Schoss created the Baker Miller pink to be used in prisons because there were some studies that said, pink calmed prisoners. Now, those have since been debunked, but that's why that was done at the time. Now, if you are a marketing major, and we talk about the psychology of color and color affecting mood, it will affect what you buy. And so a long time ago, I can remember that Heinz came out with purple and green ketchup because their idea was, all right, they're trying to sell to kids. Kids like ketchup on fries and kids like color. And so let's make some really fun colored ketchup. This was a complete bomb marketing because the association ketchup should be red. So even though it tasted the same, nobody wanted to eat it because of its color. So in marketing, color does imply certain things, and you do need to be careful of color when you develop new products. So that is interesting. Now, the last thing we're going to talk about is what color is the dress, right? So in 2015, a photograph really kind of hit the internet. It was in February. And scientists are really still discussing and arguing over this photograph because what it was a photograph that was kind of like of this dress, and people either were arguing, did you see blue and black, or did you see gold and white, or did you see something in between, right? And so everybody was saying, well, I saw this, but with the same image, I saw this, which is kind of interesting. And there's a hypothesis. Scientists still aren't really sure why people see different things, but there's a hypothesis about it. And it has to do with the bright light right here and the shade right here. So there's a bright light here and a shade here. And so those of us who say white and gold, when we're looking at the dress, we see that as underexposed or in the shade. And so our eye adjusts for the shadow and lightens the color to what it would be if the dress was viewed in normal daylight. Those of us who saw blue and black here saw the dress as overexposed, like from this light, right? It's overexposed. And so the eye adjusted for too much light and darkened the color. So that's kind of interesting, and it's interesting how, it's one picture and people's eyes did different things. It's one of the reasons why I think color is particularly fascinating. So this ends our color module. The next module that we'll talk about are elements and the periodic table.